All right, guys, so here's another screencast. This screencast is about the Reformation. Now, right here you're seeing the Reformation, but actually it's more often known as the Protestant Reformation. So you might want to go ahead and write that in. Inside there, you should see the word, and watch me now underline this, the word protest, guys, the protest Reformation. Now, obviously, you should know what the word reform is. Reform, when you ever reform something, is to make a change. And these changes were made on the protest of basically one individual. You might know him, at least the first two names, but you probably don't know who he was and what he did. So his name is Martin Luther. And I know you've heard of a famous man, probably Martin Luther King, the I Have a Dream speech. And actually, Martin Luther King, who was a theologian, and by now you should know what theology is. Theology is a study of religion. So we know that Dr. Martin Luther King got his doctorate in theology, or the study of religion. He was a pastor. And actually, he was named after Martin Luther. And both of them, quite honestly, in their own little way, protested. We had Martin Luther King, who protested for the rights of African Americans and largely all races. Well, this guy called Martin Luther, not Martin Luther King, but Martin Luther, the one in 1520 here. Go ahead and look here. The 14th and 15th centuries are still there. Martin Luther protested for the rights of Christians. Now we're going to start figuring out the difference between what a Christian is and a Catholic. Okay, so we're going to talk about this, but just to give you a heads up, the Catholic Church is the Catholic Church. It has orders, it has rules, it has a system of authority, the Pope being on the top. Then I believe you have bishops, then you have cardinals, then you have priests, and then you have people like me and you who worship. So there was this kind of what we call a church hierarchy. In other words, there was a very top and there was a bottom, and people on the top had a job doing, people on the bottom. Christians are not going to believe in that. And the Christians that we have today aren't going to believe in that. They may not listen to the Pope. They may not listen to the seven sacraments. And so we're going to get into this, but just to give you a big picture, again, the big idea right here, big idea. The Protestant Reformation came out of the idea of the Renaissance, where there was a belief that humans now had the power to basically interpret and own religion without perhaps the authority of the church. Now, there are going to be some people that go, well, you're crazy. You can't just not listen to the Pope. You're going to go to hell. That's called heresy. We burn witches and burn people to stake. Joan of Arc, John Huss. These guys are people who are going to be accused of heresy, go against the word of the Pope and actually get killed. So some people are going to say, yeah, it's time to protest. Let's do this thing. Let's start it. Other people are like, are you crazy? If we do that, we're going to get killed. We're going to get murdered. This is not good. So let's go into this story of what the Protestant Reformation is. So hopefully you understand the big idea. It's a breakaway from the Catholic Church and the organized church. That's exactly what the Protestant Reformation is. But obviously, it's more than just religious issues. We're going to see some social, some political, and some economic issues as well. So, all right, let's get into this. Let's start writing some notes. So by now, over here, you probably have the big idea. The Protestant Reformation, the causes of it, well, the church really didn't help itself. I mean, if you look at all of these things, these three things, I'm not going to go in. You already know about them. If you don't know about them, you're beginning to understand in this class that you can't just forget one thing. Everything kind of links together. So Babylonian captivity, oh my gosh, and Great Schism, oh my gosh, we have two different popes, one French, one Italian. Who's the right pope? Obviously, if you've been raised your entire life saying that there's only one pope and suddenly there's two, you might be a little confused about the authority of the church. Remember the conciliar movement? You guys took book notes on that, and that ultimately stopped from two popes to go back to one and started giving rights to what we call the French or Gallican Catholic Church. Okay, so if you're a French Catholic, you don't go to the Catholic Church, you go to the Gallican Church. And this kind of French Catholic rites are a little bit different than other Catholic rites and other Catholic beliefs. Really starts from the Great Schism when the French tried to create their own pope. And so the Italian pope, when he started being the pope, he basically said, hey, all right, French, you guys can do your things, but let's be Catholic. Let's agree on some things. And they kind of have different names. So Gallican Church and French. Anyways, moving on, because you will need to know the Gallican Church, but you don't need to know that much about it. The big thing beyond these three issues is look at, oh my goodness, these issues. Okay. So we'll talk about, let's go into a couple of these. First of all, there was corruption in the Catholic Church. One of them was simony. Guys, you have to understand that at this time, if you were in the church, you often got to pay less taxes. First of all, you didn't have to pay taxes to the church. What? The church tax people? Yeah, guys, that was like kind of the form of government in the Middle Ages. Actually, the popes were stronger than kings or queens or even the Holy Roman Emperor at this time. So because they had so much power, if you were in the church, you really didn't have to pay taxes. So you can see why some people would want to have a church office. And so what did the church do? Well, they started making money. Here, you want to be a priest and you don't want to pay taxes? Here, I'll sell you this priest office. And I know that sounds really, really weird, but remember, the Catholic Church is it's not just a spiritual thing at this time. It's a government. It has money. It has economics. It's telling people how to live, how women should live, how peasants should live, how people should live. So they have a lot of power. Obviously, this is a major issue. If you have people buying their way into office and they're not elected or they're not chosen, are these the best people for us as Catholic worshipers? And many people would look, oh my God, this guy that just got into my church doesn't know how to read. He doesn't know how to write. He doesn't know the 7 sacraments. How am I going to go to heaven if this priest doesn't even know what the heck he's talking at the time? Because the only reason he got in was so he could pay less taxes. So again, you're going to see some problems. Another thing is pluralism. Oftentimes there would be one priest who would be in charge in many different cities and many different areas. And so they would travel from one place to another to another. Well, if you're traveling all the time, you can't go back to one of the other homes to go ahead, or one of the other churches to help your people out. So, Catholics have this thing, it's called a confessional. You're supposed to confess your sins, talk about why you've been a bad boy or bad girl. Well, imagine if you're about to die and you want to have a confessional so that you can go to heaven, but your priest is about 2.5 hours walking that way, or try 2 days walking that way, because they don't have cars, they don't have planes at this time. So this was a major issue. Because they had so many offices, they were absenteeism. First of all, you were just not there, number one. And also, some people would actually get the payment and privileges, but they wouldn't actually be good, basically, priests. So we got absenteeism. You guys all talked about this, the sale of indulgences. And this is the one that's going to piss off that guy Martin Luther the most. Martin Luther is going to get the most frustrated when at his little German town, Johann Tetzel, translated to John Tetzel right here, comes into his town and says, hey, if you have any sins, or your friends have died and they have sins, and you want to make sure you go to heaven or they go to heaven, buy this piece of paper. This helps you go to heaven. Everybody's like, oh, okay, let's go buy that paper. And so people like Martin Luther, and we're going to talk about who Martin Luther was, who's a very religious man, are going to go, wait. You can sin. People who have already died can sin, and they're going to hell. But if you buy a piece of paper, you can go to heaven. This does not make any sense. So another thing besides indulgences, again, probably one of the most important things on an AP test that most people say frustrates Martin Luther the most to get him to do some actions which start the Protestant Reformation would be the sale of indulgences. Nepotism, favoring family members. We're going to see this word again with a guy named Napoleon, but so it's super important that you kind of understand this word. But nepotism is just hooking people up in your family. Again, why would you want to give them church offices? You guessed it, less taxes, less money. Also, you're probably given some rights in the church office, like probably control some more land. Maybe you control some other priests and some people. Maybe some peasants live on your land and you get to control them. So it's beyond just, paying less taxes. There are probably some other political, social, and economic reasons that they did it. Moral decline, you can talk about this. Is that bad that 20% of all your priests in Trent are having concubines, and the concubine's a prostitute? So your priest who's talking about being a good moral Christian, being celibate, and not having adultery, yet they're having sex with prostitutes. You can see why some people would be confused about that. Ignorance, like I said earlier, some people who bought their ways in simony, some of them were just basically illiterate. And remember that the clergy was the only educated group at this time. Their job was to read, write, understand the Bible, and tell the people who couldn't read and write what the Bible was about. Well, if you're going to church and you go, hey, what's that chapter about? And they go, oh, no, I can't read. Imagine how you would feel about the Catholic Church. And remember, they're coming out of the Middle Ages, guys. The Renaissance is strong, but the Middle Ages is even stronger. They're still superstitious. They're still scared that this world is just one big test for the afterlife. And so you combine the superstition, the love of religion, and you combine it with all of these issues I've just shown you about the Protestant Reformation, you could see why some people would get very, very frustrated at the Catholic Church. So moving on, going to some critics. First of all, we have John Wycliffe. We've already read a little bit about this, and he did some early reforms, and he's linked to the Protestant Reformation, because if it wasn't with the actions of some of these critics, I don't know if Martin Luther would have had the guts, would have had the know-how, and would have been willing to basically call out the Catholic Church like he does. So let's go ahead and take a couple moments to look at these guys. I am not going to talk about this guy, John Wycliffe, but you should probably take some notes. This guy was interesting because Martin Luther actually calls upon his death when he got burned at the stake, saying that was actually immoral against the church. The church made an error. And when he's calling out the church making an error, on top of being critical on those things called indulgences, those pieces of paper that get you to heaven, he takes some big steps towards pissing off the church and basically breaking his ties from the Catholic Church. We're not there yet. We'll talk about it in a second. But you got to understand that this John Huss guy is really influential to Martin Luther. He sees him kind of as like his hero and kind of wants to keep on taking his work and pushing it forward. There is another group called the Brethren of the Common Life, and it was interesting. We're going to talk about this more. So anyways, going further, it basically encouraged Christians to live simply and make religion a personal experience. You didn't need a priest nearly as much. All you need is yourself, is what these people are saying. And we're going to talk about how Martin Luther takes that idea to a whole new level. Another guy that's really important in this step is this guy Erasmus. In our reading on humanism, you probably stopped at Erasmus of Rotterdam. But what he's doing is he actually started criticizing the corruption of the church in a book called In Praise of Folly. When he criticizes it, he's just talking about all the different problems. He's not saying at this time that we should create a brand new religion. And, a contemporary, that means somebody like me and you who lives in the year 2000 or so, would say that Erasmus laid the egg that Luther later hatched. In other words, he had the idea and Luther took and ran with it even further, just like all these other critics I've just talked about. Renaissance humanism. We've talked so much about Christian humanism in our class, and we talked about the difference between Northern Renaissance, right here, and Italian Renaissance. If you don't know the difference, you might want to take a couple moments to go ahead and take some notes here. Also, go back to the Renaissance TAC, the website with all the little buttons. There's actually on the bottom a Northern versus Italian Renaissance art, and it'll give you kind of an idea of the difference as well. This is kind of a big idea, so maybe you should ask in class to Mr. Procopio or to me, Mr. Haimatsu, and go, hey, what is the difference between Christian humanism and Italian humanism again? Because this is a big idea. It is often tested many times in the tests that we have seen. All right, so moving a little bit further, we're going to talk about these guys in a second. You're like, why are we skipping these guys? Well, because we have to understand the guy Martin Luther, because these guys spin off of Martin Luther. If first there was Erasmus and then came Martin Luther, well, if Martin Luther starts this, then all these crazy guys start popping up. So we'll talk about it in a second. But let's get to the main man. You guessed it, not Martin Luther King. Martin Luther. All right. So who is Martin Luther? What's going on? Well, first of all, let's figure this out. He is a monk. He's very religious. He's not wearing a big cross, like bling, 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 with a necklace and has gold everywhere. He's wearing a black actually probably was like a black blanket that they tied around as a rope and put a hood on. He's living a very simple life. He's a teacher. He's teaching theology. Obviously, theology is a study of religion because he's a monk. And remember that most schools were that. You showed up to learn to read, write the Bible because that's what you got educated on. We don't have the type of formal education we're talking about today. We actually don't get that until the 1800s. So he's living in Wittenberg. You don't need to know anything, but if he has the word Berg, it's actually German. And then if you're thinking about countries at this time, you shouldn't be thinking about Germany. You should be thinking of say it with me, Holy Roman Empire. Yep, the Holy Roman Empire. So he's in the Holy Roman Empire, and hopefully Procopio and Namimatsu have told you a little bit that the Holy Roman Empire is kind of like the United States of German states. It's kind of, they elect an emperor, but the emperor doesn't have total control. Each state and each kingdom kind of has its own little rights. And we'll talk about why that's an issue later. Anyways, here's that guy who popped up again, Johann Tetzel. There's the word indulgences. Here you go. I don't think, I think I explained this, so I'm over it. I'm not going to do anymore. Here's that word purgatory. If you don't know what that is, you're not a good Catholic. Purgatory is between hell and heaven. So in between hell and heaven is a place called purgatory. Right when we die, if you're looking at me, right when we die, we go to this place called purgatory. And there we are judged to see, according to how we've acted on earth, if we're going to go to heaven or we're going to go to hell. So this is the idea that people would actually reduce their time in purgatory and either go to hell, I guess, or the hope is actually go to heaven. Notice that it's not a ticket to go to heaven. It's actually a ticket to lessen your time in purgatory. I don't know how a piece of paper changes your time in purgatory, but that's the belief. And you can understand why some people have some major issues with that, especially if you're very religious. Interesting later, we talked about patronage. You know, patronage, this word in the Renaissance means this, that people had enough money at this time to actually sponsor and hire artists for their work. The reason why Johann Tetzel was even going to the Holy Roman Empire in these areas is he was told by the Pope, was given authority by the Pope to raise money so that they can build an awesome church. And St. Peter's Cathedral is right by the Sistine Chapel, if you ever heard it. It's in Vatican City. It's like the big dome. I mean, it's a huge, beautiful building, but costs so much money. And actually, St. Peter, the disciple of Jesus, who has the keys to heaven, is supposed to be buried right there in the cathedral, one of the first disciples of Jesus. So anyways, just a little backstory as to why the heck was this guy going to all these different cities to get money? Well, the reason why he's getting money is because art and buildings cost money. You have to build them. And so they were getting all that for St. Peter's Cathedral. So just take a moment. If you're Martin Luther, you're a monk. This guy comes in and goes, "Hey, for sale, for sale. I got indulgences." And somebody goes, "Where's the money for the indulgences?" "Oh, we're buying another church." You'd be a little confused about how the church is running their church, actually, how the church is going, and how they're running their priests, and how are they looking for our spirits. So anyways, moving on. This causes Martin Luther to get really, really frustrated. And notice his time, let's see here, it doesn't have the time when Tetzel brings in, but on October 31st, oh, Halloween, how exciting. I did not know that. I only know the time and 95 Theses, but the 95 Theses get posted. And what does he do? He actually goes to the front of the church inside the Catholic church near his house, and he goes on to the front door and nails 95 Theses. And you should know theses as like some kind of statement or argument. And he is making 95 reasons why the church was corrupt, why the Catholic Church specifically was corrupt, and what we should do about it. So here it is. He actually nailed it. And there you go. Here's that point of the Gutenberg printing press. The printing press got a hold of this and spread the ideas, and suddenly it went all over the place. I know it says astonishing speed, but really this is like imagine before the internet, and then after the internet, how quickly we can trade things. That's what the printing press did. It went from things took months and months and years to spread to days and weeks. As it says, Luther challenged the church authority. Obviously, the posting of 95 Theses would frustrate some people. When he posts this, he kind of opens up like a can of worms. Everybody has to, now that this is all over the place, deal with it. What's the Catholic Church going to do? And many people began debating about what is the role of the church. Should we be selling indulgences? Do we believe the sacraments are important? There's 7 of them. We'll go through that later. So they began talking, having these debates, and one of them that he talks is Johann Eck. A couple of things here. He says that the Pope and the General Council can actually make mistakes. And he says, hey, the church made a mistake when they executed that John Huss guy for witchcraft, for heresy, and burned him at the stake. And when he did these two things, he basically went from, hey, let's try to work with the church and try to make it better, to calling out the church. And the church found such disrespect with that. The church actually kind of started labeling him an enemy of the church, if that makes sense, not an enemy of the state. Notice that I say enemy of the church, not enemy of the state, because remember, the church is so darn powerful at this time. So with all of this, he in 1520 says, you know what? Well, I'm going to give my arguments. So I've had these debates. I've come up with these 95 theses. But here, if I were to create a brand new religion, a protesting religion to that of the Catholic Church, this is what I would believe. So first thing he says this: salvation can be achieved through faith alone. As long as you accept the blood and body as Christ as our Lord and Savior, and you do that, you're going to be okay. You could be a jerk. You could not do anything good for anybody, but as long as you have faith in God and in Jesus, you're going to be okay. Interesting opinion. The other one is the Bible was the sole authority. The what? The Bible. Was it the Pope? Nope. Was it the priest? Nope. Was it your friend? Nope. The Bible. And if the Bible is the sole authority, what are you going to need to understand the Bible? We probably need to know how to read and write. And so that's going to be very important for Luther, because he's going to say this: if you can't read and write the Bible and you can't study the Bible, then how can you actually be saved and go to heaven? So Bible sole authority. I told you earlier there were 7 sacraments. One is like charity, like we have to give the poor. That's why you have that little basket go around in church, and everybody's supposed to drop money to give the church, because the church is supposed to give that back to the poor and charity. But he says, you know what? Out of all 7 of those, sorry, I'm not a Catholic, but out of all 7 of those, there's only 2 that we need. We only need baptism and communion. Baptism is obviously when you get bathed for accepting Jesus and Christ and accepting being a Christianity. And communion is something that we also call the Lord's Supper. It's that process when Catholics go up to the priest, and the priest go like this on a glass of wine, and then they go like this on some bread, and that transforms it into the blood, wine, and the body, cracker. I'm sure you like the actions. See my imaginary cracker. Anyways, the blood and the blood and the body now has been taken into my mouth, has been taken into my body, and now I have become one with Christ. That's the idea. So he says those are the 2 most important. Catholics have 7. I got 2. So that's what he's going to do. The church he called it the priesthood of all believers. There was no hierarchical structure. Remember, I told you earlier that there was like a structure in the Catholic Church. There was a pope on the top, and bishops, then cardinals, then priests, then people like you and me. He says, no. We're all equal in our beliefs. There is nobody with some kind of authority that has more authority to talk to God than I do. I can talk to God just as much through prayer as I can as the Pope. I hope that makes sense. So we're all equals, in other words, in our belief, in our understanding, in our worship of God and Christianity. Once again, here you go. Bible, super important. It contained everything you needed to know. He criticizes the sale of indulgences and simony, says those are obviously hugely corrupting things that are causing problems. And then he encouraged the German princes to reform the church in their states. Notice it says reform. It does not say break away at this time. You know, Martin Luther is a Catholic. He was born a Catholic. He's a monk. He's a Catholic monk. He is trying to do everything that he believes is the right thing according to God and everything that he has studied. And he's just basically trying to reform the church, change it, not to break away from it. I guess he rejects the Catholic monastery tenets. Monasteries are usually monks of poverty. Yeah, you have to be poor. Chastity, you're not allowed to have sex, and obedience. And these are kind of issues that still plague, especially the idea of chastity, the Catholic Church today. Currently, our Pope is working to identify if the idea of chastity is actually leading to some of the sexual misconducts of priests. So anyways, just to bring this back right here, this is an issue that especially with the word chastity, the Catholic Church is still working and dealing with. He comes out with this, and the Pope goes, "Are you serious? You're going to call me out? Okay, you're excommunicated." And excommunicated means this: you are no longer a member of the church. And if you're no longer a member of the church, you're not allowed to go to heaven. And so this is a power that popes had. And again, you're starting to see that. And some of the popes actually use this against kings to threaten them. And the kings would go, okay, fine, I'm good. I won't piss you off anymore, Pope, because I don't want to get excommunicated. So excommunicated was a very important power. It basically ensured that you were not going to go to heaven because you didn't have the opportunity to be a good Christian and follow the Catholic Church. So Pope Leo does that. Remember, where is Luther living? He's living in where? Germany. But we don't call it Germany right now. We call it the Holy Roman Empire. And that brings us to our next step. The Holy Roman Emperor, remember, if you read, his job was to make sure Holy Roman Emperor. Let me go back. Holy Roman Emperor. His job was to make sure that Catholicism stayed strong in the lands that he went. That was like kind of his number one job. So if you have this little priest that you never heard of called Martin Luther in some little town you never heard of, causing all of this chaos, he's spreading his words throughout the entire, all of Europe, not just within the Holy Roman Empire, but all of Europe. As a pope, not a pope, but as the Holy Roman Empire, you're like, I think I need to control this guy because this guy's calling me out. Because it was kind of the idea that the Pope said things and the Holy Roman Emperor was supposed to do the things the Pope was supposed to do for the Holy Roman Empire, if that makes sense. So with that being said, he there creates a Dia de Worms, and the Dia de Worms is more of a meeting, or like it's actually kind of like a courtroom. And in this courtroom, Charles, who is the Holy Roman Emperor, says that Martin Luther should take back all of the things that he said, all the way up here, all of these things. He's like, dude, you can't just call this out. And Luther goes, nah, I'm not. He says, here I stand. I'm not going to do it. I made this decision. It is what it is. We're moving forward, and I'm going to go. And so because of this, could you imagine this? A little monk who was not a nothing, basically called out probably one of the second most powerful people in all of Europe at this time underneath the Pope, the Holy Roman Empire. And the Holy Roman Empire says, you know what? Fine. I'm going to create an edict, a law. And he says this, Luther, you are outlawed as a heretic. You have committed a crime against me, the Holy Roman Empire. You committed a crime against the Catholic Church. You're gone. You're not allowed to come in here. Later, there's a king, Frederick III. He's Prussian, and we'll talk about this later. He protects him, and we'll talk about why why princes like Frederick III and others are going to protect Luther, or at least protect his ideas, or maybe it's not protect them, but use their ideas for their own purpose. And that's coming in a second, but not right now. So anyways, just to go back, Dia Worms, it's a judge, it's a court case. Here, Charles says, you need to recant your ideas. Luther says, are you crazy? I ain't doing that. And so Charles says, you know what? Fine. You're not allowed to be in the Holy Roman Empire. Then what happens? Luther's taken by a couple of princes that like what he's saying, like what he's doing, and protect him in the council, where he's allowed to continue to write and continue to bring his ideas. Later, in 1523, Luther translated the Bible into the vernacular. Now, this is an important part for the Renaissance. Remember that in the Renaissance, they started moving away from Latin and Greek texts to more of the texts that were written in the national origin. And that's what the word vernacular means. So Spanish would be a vernacular language. English would be vernacular, and German would be a vernacular language. Italian would be a vernacular language. Not Greek. Gotcha. Italian, Swiss, Dutch, all of those languages would be considered vernacular languages, not Latin and not Greek. So he did that. Why would he do the Bible? Ding, 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 ding. It goes on up here. Up here. Where is it? Somewhere. He says what? The Bible is the sole authority. If you don't know Latin and Greek, how the heck are you going to understand the Bible and how you're going to be able to save yourself? So he said, instead of doing the Latin, instead of the Greek, man, those languages are so hard. Nobody uses them anyway. Why don't we translate them into the languages people use today? And maybe we can start educating them in their language instead of this dead language that nobody uses. And so thankfully he did, because we're using English in America. I think it's a lot better than Latin. So anyways, that went down. So later, after he does this, remember that he is kicked out of, and he's kind of excommunicated from the Holy Roman Empire, but protected. He writes, I guess, Confessions of Augsburg, and this is not written by him, but a guy called Philip Melanchthon. And I guess it was an attempt, basically, to unite. Now here we have the word Lutheran and Catholic princes. Who are the Lutherans? Obviously, the people that followed Martin Luther. Who are the Catholics? The people who are following the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope and remaining Catholic, saying, you're too crazy. We're not going to do that. It's rejected by the Catholic princes. And basically, through this confession, 3 ideas are basically cemented into stone. If you're a Lutheran prince, or if you're a Lutheran church, or you want to practice the things of Martin Luther, this is what you got to do. Number 1, salvation is through faith alone. Your belief in God is what's going to save you, not the way that you act, not definitely thinking that God is not our Savior. You have to accept him. You have to accept God and Jesus as your Savior. Number 1. Number 2, you got to understand the Bible. You got to be able to read it. You got to be able to own it. You got to be able to interpret it, and you should be able to pray on it. That's your job. It's not the priest's job. It's not the Pope's job. It's not your friend's job. It's your job. And lastly, we're the priesthood of all believers. There's nobody that has more power to talk to God, not somebody that has more power to sell pieces of paper to go to heaven. That stuff is all out the window. We are all equal. We are all the same and all have the same opportunity to go to heaven or go to hell based upon our faith. Again, not our actions, but our faith. Okay, so hopefully you understand Martin Luther. Right now, I've gone into the context as to why Martin Luther popped up, all the problems of the church, who Martin Luther was, why he said the things that he did, and what happened when he said the things that we did. Now, one more little thing that we need to know, and this is going to be a much bigger issue in our next unit. There's actually going to be major wars that break out all through Europe because of this guy, Martin Luther. You thought World War I was bad. You thought World War II bad. This was much, much worse. So just to give you a heads up, there are going to be some political and economic issues for that. So let's talk about the political stuff. The spread of Lutherans. Many states in the north turned to Lutheranism. One has to do with the Northern Renaissance. Remember, these guys were more religious than the Italian. And when I say religious, it's not like Italians weren't religious. I mean, they had the Pope in your backyard, for God's sakes. But what I'm saying is that they were more pious. You might want to Google that word. And here's the word pious right here, Pious. And pious just means more sacred. Like, there could be somebody that says, man, I love Jesus. And they have like a Jesus shirt. They have like a Jesus cross and blah, blah, blah. And there could be somebody that says, I love Jesus and just acts like him. If you're doing that, you're more pious. It's more of a solemn, a calmer, not nearly as exciting and extravagant way to worship your religion. So in the North, they're a heck of a lot more pious. And also remember that the Holy Roman Empire, look at my hands, look at the corner, down here, I'm down somewhere over here, I think. The Holy Roman Empire is an area with many, 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 many different kingdoms. And all these different kingdoms and princes wanted to break away from the Holy Roman Emperor. Why? Everybody wants more power. Everybody wants more independence. You want to break away from your parents. You want to break away from this class. You want to break away from this computer. You want to be different. You want to be free. And so some of these princes are like, wait. This guy Martin Luther has a way to call out the Holy Roman Emperor and break away from his power as a Catholic leader of the Holy Roman Empire. Man, sign me up. I want that religion. I don't want to listen to the Holy Roman Emperor anymore. I don't want to deal with his Catholic ways. And so many German princes now began to escape the authority of the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire, and they start taking church lands since guess what? It's not the church anymore, because since I create a new church, it's called the Lutheran Church, not the Catholic Church. And they grab it and it goes underneath the state or under their authority as princes. Remember, German princes are in control of the state. So if the state benefits, the princes benefit. All right. Another big thing, and this is always true, the further south you go in Europe, the more Catholic you become. Why? You're getting closer and closer to the Pope. People further and further north are feeling further and further away from the Pope and from the idea of Catholicism. Here you go. Denmark and Sweden became Lutheran states. Where are they? In the north, or are they near Italy? Way up to the north. In fact, these are like the three fingers, Denmark, Sweden, and Finland. The three fingers up on the very top next to Russia that come down. Oh yeah, you should know that because you passed your map test. Moving on. Lutheranism, blah, 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 blah. Lutheran did not spread much beyond northern Germany and Scandinavia. We'll talk about Calvinists later. So who is this emperor? It's Emperor Charles V. What are the two words that should be before him? Holy Roman Emperor. So hopefully you're writing that down right here. This is the guy that has been voted in and he's charged in making sure that Catholicism, stays the same. Hegemony means to stay the same, to have total control. And so look at his goal. His goal is to stop Protestantism, stop Luther, and make sure that we all stay Catholic. There are a lot of issues. Hopefully you guys are reading this. These are some of the type of things that were happening. But just to skip, we're going to talk about the Peasants' War, and this is where we're going to end our discussion today. So what is interesting here is Emperor Charles V, right? He's in charge of these things. He's trying to control Catholicism. We have Martin Luther trying to spread Protestantism and Lutheranism. And so because of that, we got a bunch of poor, uneducated people that are going to take advantage of the situation. And this is called the Peasants' War and the German Peasants' Revolt. It is also known as the Swabian peasants. Why? They were actually in the county or area of Swabia or something like that. what they did is they created 12 articles, and in these, the peasants demanded some things. Beyond just control of the religion, like Luther said was okay, they started saying this, you know what, we should stop being treated like slaves, the end of serfdom, slavery. We should stop being taxed and making sure taxed by the church, tithes, to be taxed by church. And other things. They had hunting rights. They had equality of property. I mean, a lot of things that went beyond religion. And they had thought that Luther, who had said, you know, it's okay to break away, it's okay to make your own thing, would be okay and would support their revolt against these princes. But the problem with this was, who was protecting Martin Luther from the Holy Roman Empire? Ding, ding, ding. Remember, I told you earlier, the princes. So if you're being protected by the princes from a guy called the Holy Roman Emperor, and suddenly you have a bunch of small, uneducated people who are screaming your name, but calling out the princes who are protecting you, are you going to call out the princes who are protecting you, or are you going to call out the peasants? You guessed it. Martin Luther wanted to save his own skin. He probably wanted to live a little bit longer. He probably didn't want to die without the protection of his princes. So he decides very cleverly to support the princes, while all of the peasants who are uneducated went, I thought he was going to support us. So what does he do? Ironically, Luther's view on peasant movements were very conservative. Although he wanted religious reform, he believed that people should obey their political authorities. And I don't know if he really believed it, or if he just said, hey, crazy peasants who are uneducated, you're going to get me killed. So stop acting crazy and just listen to the princes, because the princes are my friend. I hope that makes sense. Luther may have sympathized with the complaints of the peasants, but he obviously did not like the violence. The violence was actually quite oppressive. Remember, these guys are uneducated, they're excited, and we've seen too many times in the news, whether it be the Middle East or the Deep South, when people are in large groups and they're excited and there's no leadership and there might be a level of uneducation about the issue. I'm not saying they're uneducated, but there might be a little issue. Usually bad things happen. And obviously this protest in this peasants' war it's this peasants' war, for God's sakes. It was violent. So check this out. Next one, 100,000 peasants died. And both the Catholic and Lutheran princes all took forces to stop the revolt. I guess when you're a Catholic prince and you're a Lutheran prince, you both hate peasants who are trying to kill you. Which gets us to another thing, which is the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So I hate the Catholics hate Lutherans hate Catholics, but what they hate worse is a bunch of peasants trying to take away their power and authority. So anyways, we're going to be talking later. These are a little bit more of the religious wars that we'll be talking about. So we're going to go ahead and take a pause there. But obviously, you guys can see. So you should stop here. I know you're probably like getting sick seeing everything. So we're going to stop right there. But right now, you should have understood, number one, what again happened before Martin Luther? Why did Martin Luther show up? What did he say? And what were the effects of those? And I think I've been very clear in this screencast about this thing. So hope you enjoyed it. As I say, protest is patriotism. If we didn't have protests like Martin Luther King or Martin Luther, we wouldn't have Christianity, and we definitely wouldn't have the rights for all races that we're still working so hard for. So protest is patriotism. Welcome to Protestant Reformation. And next we'll be talking about the major wars that are happening all throughout Europe because of this major issue. All right, guys, study hard.